This election cycle is one of the most important, if not the most important, in the city's history. And it's really not about parties, it's about people.
So we say we have a crime problem, but in reality, our problem is an opportunity problem and an economic problem.
We have a large level of income disparity in the city, and in order to close that gap, the best way to do that is quality education.
I think one of the pieces that's missing in Baltimore is that there's a lack of trust.
We've got leadership currently in the city that is doing so much back and forth, almost like a tennis match, and we have to do better.
From Fox 45 News, this is a Your Voice, Your Future mayoral debate.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mary Bubala. Welcome to our second 2020 Baltimore City mayoral debate. We are now less than 3 weeks to Election Day. Mail-in voting underway right now and early voting just around the corner. Baltimore plagued with violent crime, trash in the streets, rats, government corruption, and a multi-billion-dollar debt poses huge challenges for whomever is elected. And when you toss the COVID crisis on top of all of that, causing the city to lose businesses and jobs, the challenge is even greater. Your choice of a leader, never more important. Well, tonight we have two candidates socially distanced in our studio. They have both agreed to answer our tough questions. Please welcome Republican Pastor Shannon Wright and independent businessman Bob Wallace. Now, we'll meet you both in just a minute, but first we have some housekeeping to take care of. We need to mention Democratic nominee and City Council President Brandon Scott was invited to participate tonight. His campaign only received to our invitation and did not call us back as promised. Here are the rules for tonight. We drew to determine who got the first question. Mr. Wallace's name was chosen from a hat. Each candidate gets 1 minute to answer a question. At 1 minute, you will hear the following sound. Each candidate will have a total of 5 rebuttals of up to 30 seconds. Each candidate will also have a closing statement. Now, joining us tonight for this conversation is our investigative researcher, Julian Barron. He will be fact-checking statements made throughout the night. Julian, welcome. Thanks for being here. All right, we're going to get started with the issues. We polled voters during the primary on what the top issues were, and the number one answer by a large margin, the city's crime problem. Specifically, voters are focused on violent crime and murder. The city about to hit 270 homicides, on the way to a 6th straight year of more than 300 murders. The first question is to both of you tonight. Illegal guns became a flashpoint after a Fox 45 News investigation showed the city council has only passed one watered-down bill in 10 years to target the guns blamed for the violent crime epidemic. Mr. Wallace, how do you get the guns out of the hands of the bad people?
Well, there's a main approach I use called ATM, right? Ask, tell, and make. So we know who the people are who are using the guns to commit crimes. We know they're hot people in hot spots. So what we do is we focus on the hot people and the hot spots. These are the people who are committing these crimes. We know where they are. We know where they live. So we convene a meeting with these folks. We bring in community organizers. We bring in social workers. We bring in law enforcement. And we have a very simple conversation. The conversation is, you must stop this behavior, and we're going to help you stop. How are we going to do that? We're going to provide wraparound services through job training, workforce development, homeless issues, whatever, behavioral health, whatever that case might be. And we're going to help these people to make a better choice. Now, if they choose to move in the wrong direction after all this help, then we will make them stop. And we'll make them stop by enforcing the law and holding them accountable for their actions.
Mr. Wallace, thank you. Ms. Wright, the same question to you. Where do you begin to deal with this issue of illegal guns?
So I think that you got to do a couple of things first. You got to try and understand and figure out where the guns are coming in from, and put some sort of penalties or fines or on that. Then you got to look at the folks that have these guns. Most of these folks didn't wake up one day and say, hey, I'm just going to do this. These are folks that have been doing this. This is not their first foray in dealing with the criminal justice system. These are repeat offenders. This is where the whole recidivism rate comes in. And we've got to look at what we're doing to do two things. One, when folks that do go away come back and they're really reformed and ready to re-enter society, we make that easier for them to do so. And those folks that have not changed their ways and continue to do what they want to continue to do, we make sure that they understand that this is the confines of the law, these are the maximum sentences, this is what's going to happen, and we make that happen. But in order to do that, we also have to have a prosecutor that is without reproach. And it's real difficult for the criminals to take you seriously as an elected official when the prosecutor's under investigation and all sorts of mix-up herself.
We're going to get to that in a little bit. Mr. Wallace, I want to ask the next question to you. The defund the police movement has been sweeping across the country. Do you support giving less money to police when violent crime is out of control?
This is not the time to consider defunding the police in terms of giving them less resources in order to do their jobs. I think that that term is a bad term that we should not be using. Now, does it mean that we can reimagine how we do public safety? Yes. Does it mean that we can look at a different way of how we do this? Yes. The city of Baltimore this year will spend about 44% of its budget on public safety. We have to find a better way to use those funds to get better results. We're asking our officers to do things they were never trained to do. So the key is, how do we use those funds to better provide resources and wraparound resources to work with the police to address the issues facing our city? But no, we cannot do that. And besides that, the consent decree would not allow that. We have to follow the consent decree by the letter of the law in order to pass that. And so I do not support defunding the police. And the people in the communities, they don't support that either. They want more police in their neighborhoods, not fewer.
All right, Ms. Wright, you say in your public safety plan we need to rid Baltimore City Police Department of corrupt officers. How will you do that?
So our officers have to understand that they are accountable to the same laws that they are supposed to be enforcing on the streets. We cannot have, you can't rebuild trust to be able to properly police our communities when folks are wondering if the officer that's coming to visit them because there's a situation is going to be a part of the solution or a part of the problem. So we have to get that in order. Part of that, in addition to reorganizing how we do some of the policing things, we also have to add some support services for our officers. Officers face days and days of trauma. We talk about the trauma in terms of the folks in the community, but officers, when you're on call after call and you're seeing all sorts of things that in a properly run city and world you would not see, our officers are going to be affected by that trauma adversely as well. So the type of wraparound services that we're talking about offering to offenders and folks in the community that have been victims, we also need to offer to our officers. In order for this thing to work, we have to start rebuilding bridges and trust.
All right, Ms. Wright, thank you. Mr. Wallace, your public safety plan talks a lot about using strategic partnerships to fight crime. You say you're going to work with your coalition of thought leaders and change makers to develop an anti-crime plan. Who are those thought leaders and change makers you want to work with? Who are they?
So let's first start with the experts in the field. There are different experts who have expertise in crime fighting. We're going to get those folks involved. Then at the state level, there are resources at the state level with the governor and the police systems within the state level. We're going to get those folks involved as well. But even at the federal level, we're talking about the DEA and the ATF. Because we have a gang situation in our city where we need to have resources to be able to fight the gangs and to handle the gun trafficking that's happening in our city. I do not believe that the city of Baltimore has all the resources that it needs to fight this battle. So therefore, we're going to rely upon state resources and federal resources in order to use the federal courts and federal law enforcement in order to hold people accountable for their actions. We're not talking about criminalizing an entire group of people. That's not my point. The point is to identify the men and women who are committing these crimes and then using the resources at the city, the state, and federal level in order to hold them accountable.
All right, Mr. Wallace, thank you. Ms. Wright, do you think the police commissioner, Michael Harrison, is on the right track? Would you keep him as part of your administration if elected? And if so, why?
So I don't believe in knee-jerk reactions. And being that Commissioner Harrison and I have not had a chance to sit down and talk about some of the things that need to change and be addressed in the city, and not for lack of trying on my part. It would be unfair for me to say whether he should stay or go. But I will say this, statistically speaking, what he is doing is not working. If it was, we would not be heading to a 6th straight year of 300+ homicides. We would not be looking at expanding numbers and categories and types and younger ages of folks committing crimes. If the strategy that was being used was actually working, the numbers would reflect it, and they don't. But when you talk to the officers, they tell you that things started to change when they got away from things that we knew worked, like community policing, like bike patrols, like making sure that the officer that's in that community is regularly in that community, so you start to build that bridge and that open door for communication. We've got to get back to basics.
All right, Mr. Wallace, same question to you. Would you keep Commissioner Harrison as part of your administration? And if so, why?
Yeah, I think what Ms. Wright said is not really fair to the commissioner. So I would keep the commissioner. And the reason why is that in the last 5 years, we've had 4 different commissioners. It is impossible to build a public safety plan with this revolving door approach. I have talked with Commissioner Harrison. I have seen his plan, and I think that his approach of focused deterrence is one that can work. It has worked in New Orleans. It has worked in other cities, and I believe that what he needs is the proper resources to implement that plan, because it's only been about 2 years, and so we need to give him the time to do that. I support him. I would keep him on board and hold him accountable for the results. If I got to a point where I thought it was not working, then I would make a change. But right now, it's too soon. We need to give him what he needs, and the new mayor needs to handle the politics of public safety. Our commissioner spends too much time dealing with the politics of public safety. Let the mayor do that. That's the mayor's job. So the mayor cannot be a play mayor. The mayor has to be a mayor who's on point and in the trenches fighting this battle to make change.
Ms. Wright, you'd like to respond?
I would, because I'm a little bit confused. I'm not sure what part of my saying it would be unfair for me to make a judgment without a conversation with the police commissioner was incorrect. I don't believe I should be making snap judgments. I'm assuming there's another part of my statement that you're referring to. Maybe it's the facts or the statistics or the numbers. Well, they don't lie either.
Yeah.
We are heading in the wrong direction. We have not turned around. We need to turn around. And in order for that to happen in an effective and evenly balanced way,
Right.
it means having a conversation and not making a snap, knee-jerk reaction based on snippets and sound bites. And that's something I won't do.
All right. For our next section, we're going to talk about government corruption, and we will begin with Pastor Wright. News breaking this Tuesday night. The IRS, according to court documents, has placed a lien on the home of Marilyn Mosby and her husband for more than $45,000 for failing to pay federal income taxes. This is the latest high-profile issue involving elected officials like Marilyn Mosby or Nick Mosby, including 2 mayors who have been convicted. Now, all this breaks the trust with the public. How would you rebuild that trust? Ms. Wright.
So it actually goes farther than the 2 mayors that we've had or that have had issues. There's also former Delegate Glenn and Nat. Oh, and there's a bunch of folk, and a former police commissioner. This seems to be a pattern in Baltimore City. So what we have tried to do in my team and in my administration, we will continue to do, is to not just say what we're going to do, but actually do it, and do it in a manner that folks can see and hear what it is that we're doing. For example, it is very hard for you to be the person responsible for prosecution when you're under investigation. It is very hard for you to have that kind of trust to be able to solve some of the problems on the street and with the crime when you are under investigation yourself. And with candidate Mosby looking to be council president, that is not the direction this city needs to go. And in my administration as mayor, we will all have to hold ourselves to a higher standard, simply because, I'm gonna put it to you this way, I don't wanna do, and I'm not going to do, anything during the day that is going to cause me to lose sleep at night. We all need to hold ourselves to a higher standard, and it's gotta start each individual moving out from there.
Mr. Wallace, same question to you. How will you rebuild the public's trust in public officials?
Well, how do you build trust? You build trust by doing what you say you're going to do, and then doing that consistently, and then giving validation and proof that you did it. There's no question that trust has been an issue in our leadership. One of the reasons that businesses do not invest in Baltimore City is that they say that our leadership has, now listen to this term, they say our leadership has low capacity, that our political leadership has low capacity. Now, what does that mean? It means that, number one, the trustworthiness is an issue, accountability, corruption, lack of innovation, lack of ideas. And so if we're going to build our city, we need to have leaders that have great capacity in order to change our city. It is disturbing, and it is sad that we once again go down this path. And we need to hold everyone accountable for their actions. But I know that if we're going to rebuild Baltimore City, bring in new companies, new investors, new entrepreneurs, we've got to get past this image that our leadership has low capacity, and this does not help that situation.
All right, we're going to start our next question with Mr. Wallace. The grassroots group Act Now conducted a survey of more than 16,000 people. 7 out of 10 said it was time to replace the political class that has not solved the current problems in Baltimore. Despite this, a 10-year city veteran politician, Brandon Scott, is the presumed leader in this race. So make your case on why Baltimore needs to pivot away from a career politician and toward an outsider like you.
Well, you know, I'm an engineer and business person, so I'm kind of old school. It's like, you know, look at someone's past to get an idea of what you can expect from them in the future. You look at Mr. Scott's past, 10, 11 years in City Hall and City Council. You look at what has he accomplished. You look at what results has he created. Is crime down? Is violence down? Are there more jobs in the city? So this idea that we keep going back to the same playbook and the same coaches to lead our city does not make any sense. When I've traveled the neighborhoods through our Walk with Wallace campaign, we launched 2 months ago, we've tracked over 400,000 steps in all 32 zip codes of Baltimore City. And the one thing I heard from everyone at my walk, and we've talked to hundreds of people, is that they're saying that we need new leadership in the city and we need to go in a new direction. And Brandon Scott is not that new leadership. This idea of a fresh way forward does not make any sense. And as my dad used to say, that dog don't hunt. And so we as the voters need to hold him accountable to his past and to his record.
Ms. Wright, I want to give you a chance to make your case as well. Why should Baltimore pivot away from a career politician and toward an outsider like you?
So I'm going to stick with the facts. Other than I'm a more experienced leader, let's just look at the facts. During the primary campaign, Brandon Scott campaigned on defunding the police, knowing full well that he could not do that. The only thing he had the power to do was to restructure the budget and take money away from the police department, but he did not have the power to reallocate those funds as he promised as his campaign progressed. Now, you've got one of two ways of looking at that. Either he was blowing smoke at you from the beginning, and voters, if he's blowing smoke, you don't need him. Or two, he didn't know. In that case, you still don't need him. That's number one. Number two, when we talk about how, yes, government is broken and how, and when Mr. Scott says, and under my administration, I'm going to fix it because, yes, business is not, the elected folks have not been responsive to the needs of the citizens and to the businesses. Well, bro, listen, you've been elected for doggone 10 years. How is it that you were trained in these 2 failed administrations that led to criminal charges? That's where your philosophy came from. That's what you believe. That's what you're preaching. And that's supposed to be better? Baltimore, a new direction means a new vote. Get rid of the failed policies.
And we want to reiterate that City Council President and Democratic nominee Brandon Scott was invited to be part of this debate tonight, and he declined. He did win the primary. Now we're going to welcome in our researcher, Julian Barron, for the next section. Julian, you can begin with a question to Mr. Wallace.
Mary, thank you. Mr. Wallace, part of your transparency plan is to conduct a complete financial audit of every city agency when you first take office. Now, as you know, the city already conducts internal audits with the city auditor of all agencies on a biennial basis, those agencies being listed in the city charter. So do you believe the audits the city is conducting right now are not effective?
I believe that the auditing office that the city currently has in place is understaffed and underfunded. And I also feel, I'm concerned that it may be influenced politically. So my approach is to bring in an outside resource, a third-party resource, to do a forensic audit on every single agency in our city. I want to know where the money's coming in. I want to know how it's being used. I want to know if there's any leakage that is occurring, because in a city that has a difficult time paying its bills and even putting out its water bills, I mean, it doesn't make any sense for us to have to think about or to be concerned about where our money's being spent. So, sir, I'm going to do a forensic audit from an outside agency. I'm not going to require or depend upon the taxpayers to pay for this audit. We're going to use outside resources to have that audit done. But I think a third-party audit is necessary for me to feel comfortable that I know what I'm working with as in my first 100 days as mayor. And I think that would be key to give me confidence that we're on the right plan.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. And Ms. Wright, now on to you. A question for you about Baltimore's economy. Right now, businesses in the city are struggling more than ever due to the effects of COVID-19, as we all know. The Downtown Partnership estimates the hotel industry alone could lose up to $940 billion in total output. What role does a Wright administration play in reviving the city's economy post-COVID-19 pandemic?
So, interestingly enough, the city's economic picture wasn't looking too rosy before COVID, and COVID has kind of really sped up that process in the wrong direction. So we got to do a couple of different things. First of all, I had an opportunity to have a really great conversation today with the editor of the Baltimore Business Journal. We were talking about how in Baltimore, the elected folks don't seem to take the small and medium-sized businesses as our partners, which is wrong, and we need to change that paradigm of thought. Also, in a way of expanding on what I've always said is that we have to do now so that we can continue once elected. We reached out to the Minority Business Development Administration under the Department of Commerce, and we had several meetings with that director, and asked specifically, what are the resources that you have that you can share with us in the city of Baltimore, either as a demonstration program or as an ongoing continuing program with regards to resources specifically for Black and brown businesses in our city. They are the job creators, and they are so affected right now by COVID. We actually have a program that was successfully accepted, and we're looking to start that demonstration model.
Ms. Wright, thank you. Mary, back to you.
And I think we do have a rebuttal from Mr. Wallace. If we can go back to Mr. Wallace. You have 30
yes,
seconds.
just a slight one. So I do think, Ms. Wright, that the idea that we can depend upon the Department of Commerce or NBDA to help our city during this period, our businesses, when we have a president under President Trump who has tried to kill the NBDA program. So I don't think that NBDA and commerce in that capacity is a good resource that we can depend upon as a city to help us through this COVID situation as businesses. So I would wonder why you would support that approach.
Ms. Wright, do you want to respond? Yes.
Of course I do. So sometimes you don't need to reinvent the wheel, you just need to make it work better. Now, your feeling about the MDBA and the president, that's cute, and I understand that.
It's not cute, it's real.
I'm sorry, I did not interrupt you. I would appreciate the same courtesy
Okay.
and respect. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, as I was saying, the MDBA has just been made a standalone organization. That's number one. Number two, it is the only agency that is mandated to be able to help minority businesses. So, unless you feel that we should be going someplace other than that, I'm going to go to where I know the resources are for the segments of our population that I know need the help. Politics ain't got nothing to do with this. This is about helping people. This is about helping businesses, because they are the economic engine and the job creators.
But I would just say, Ms. Wright, I would agree that the mission of NBDA is what you said, but if it is underfunded on purpose by the leadership, then it cannot achieve its objective. And I'm suggesting to you that the current president, has consistently tried to underfund that agency because he's not committed to minority and women businesses in this country. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, final word on this subject. Go ahead, Ms. Wright.
It is interesting to me that with all the issues and the problems in Baltimore, you seem to be fixated and fascinated with our president. For me, I'm going to go where the resources are, and I'm going to bring them back here to this city on the local level to deal with the people that are hungry, that are facing not being able to pay their rent and their mortgage, where there are jobs that are leaving the city, where the population is declining. That's going to be my focus. And as the next mayor of this city, that's where my focus should be. You all, you are my focus. You all are my priority, not the political stuff at the state or the federal. Them boys can figure that out and fight it out for themselves. My job is to fight for you.
Okay, for our next section, we will move on to education. We will begin this section with Pastor Wright. The Kirwan Commission is set to inject millions of additional dollars into the Baltimore City school system, but Baltimore City Schools already spends the third most per student of any district in the country, including, that's according to the U.S. Census. Kirwan would also cost the city hundreds of millions of additional dollars within the next decade. So do you believe Kirwan is the right direction for Baltimore schools?
The answer that I would give you today is very different than I would have given you 6 months ago, pre-COVID. I don't think that we can afford to make a blanket decision on that size expenditure right now with the economic crisis that we are facing because of COVID. But what I will say is it's an opportunity, it's a time now to prioritize education and to be able to go to the state to lobby for an introduction of educational savings accounts, of expanding the voucher program. Now, some folks are going to say that's going to destroy our public school system, but no. You go and you ask, listen, for $10,000, you can get a decent private school education. Can we keep that difference in the city between the $17,000 the state sends and that $10,000 and be able to get heat in some of our buildings for public schools that need heat, and be able to get air, and be able to get that difference into the hands of the teachers so that the resources actually get into the classrooms. By doing that, you reduce class sizes, you take some of the burden off of the teachers by introducing some of those supplemental resources so they are able to free up their time to do what they were hired to do, which is teach. And you put the supports in place for the extra things that are needed so that everyone can stay in their lane and the students all benefit.
Mr. Wallace, last year, I know you're aware the Baltimore City school system was caught withholding public information during a Fox 45 News Project Baltimore investigation into grade-changing allegations. Fox 45 News eventually won a lawsuit over the city school system. The documents were ordered to be released. We've done stories on them now. What would you do as mayor to bring more transparency and accountability to North Avenue and prevent issues like this from ever taking place?
Well, I think, first of all, as the mayor, my plan is to take ownership of our education system. Now, we do have this interesting relationship between the state and the city, but I think to get the outcomes for our children, the mayor has to own the education process. You cannot fix a problem unless you own it. So I believe that Dr. Sandalise is an intelligent woman. I think she has a great plan. What we need to do, she and I, is to talk about that plan in detail and to see how we're going to use it and hold ourselves accountable in order to achieve the objectives. I think that the education of our children is critical. As far as the Kirwan plan, I support the Kirwan plan, but we might need to delay its implementation, and we might need to rearrange its priorities. My focus on education is twofold. Number one, to provide wraparound services for the school day, to provide food and education in the morning and in the afternoon when the kids leave school, and also during the school year, to make the school year more robust by providing wraparound services, to provide summer internships and jobs during the breaks so that our children are being educated throughout the entire year.
Okay, Ms. Wright, you want a rebuttal? You have one more after this.
Okay. I appreciate Mr. Wallace's prioritizing of education. However, there's a few steps missing. In order for the next mayor and in my administration to own education, you actually have to have the authority to do so. And currently, our Board of Education is only partially put in place by the mayor and partially by the governor. So in order to have ownership, that means actual owning the pieces. And under this current structure, that's not possible. So one of the things that needs to happen is to kind of unify that structure. You have half the board on one page, half on another, and it's very difficult to get a consensus, and our children end up falling into the gap in the middle. And that needs to change.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Wallace, you want to also speak to that? You will have a few more rebuttals after this.
I'll be very quick. So I think, Mr. Wright, we may need to check that data, because I believe that the mayor appoints the entire board of the Baltimore school system. And I do believe that board needs to be repurposed. I think that board needs to be made up of men and women who love education, who are committed to children, but who also have the power to make things happen. Who have the relationships to get through doors to help benefit our children. The school system on its own does not have the resources nor the influence to do what these kids, to do for the kids what needs to be done. So I think that board needs to be reconstituted, and I believe the mayor has more power than you give him or her.
Okay, thank you both. We're going to go back to our researcher, Julian Barron, for our next section. Julian, you can begin with a question for Pastor Wright.
Mary, thank you. And before we go to that question, just a quick fact check. The members of the Baltimore City Board of School Commissioners are appointed by the mayor of Baltimore, just to get that onto the record. But Pastor Wright, a question for you right off the bat. You've pledged to establish in your plan, which is on your website, accountability and transparency systems within the Baltimore City school system. Of course, you just spoke a moment ago about how there needs to be more oversight from City Hall over the school system. But how specifically would you accomplish that goal from a legislative perspective?
So there are certain things that need to happen. First of all, there are a couple of different things. One, we have to address curriculum and whether or not that curriculum is successfully preparing our students. We have to address how much of the resources that come into the district are actually making it into the classrooms. And three, we have to also address how the teachers are having to manage their time with regards to the extra activities that they're required to do in addition to teaching. So we really have to reshape some of that paradigm, and it's kind of really pretty simple. If your child is going to school to learn, there's a curriculum, there's certain things that they should be able to master. If they are not mastering it, if they don't have the proper resources, if the teachers are required to do too much than teach, then obviously it's not working, and we need to address it from a very basic standpoint. Either the students are in a place where they're able to learn because the teachers are able to teach and they have the resources, or they don't, and we need to fix that. And part of the way we do that is not just a fiscal, but a performance audit. And when you look at the Board of Education from a performance side, the numbers just aren't there. Our students need to be better prepared. There's a lot of work to be done.
Pastor Wright, thank you. Shifting now to Mr. Wallace, you've said increasing city school funding will help raise graduation rates. Mary mentioned a moment ago, and Fox 45's reported that city schools are the third most funded per student in the nation. So based on that, why do you believe putting more funding into the school system now will accomplish something that so far it just has not done?
Well, first of all, I believe that the Baltimore school system is the fourth highest per pupil system, but you can fact check that as well. But regardless, so the children of Baltimore City that are in our system are children who come to school traumatized. They've seen violence on the streets and in their families. Many of them live in poverty. They're not getting the meals. So we have a system where many of our children just are not prepared to absorb the education that we're trying to give them. I believe that if we provide these wraparound services on the front part of the school day in the morning with meals and tutoring, and on the back end to provide tutoring and support through our rec centers that I'm looking to convert from rec centers to community tech centers, then we'll be in a better position to educate these children who are at risk and who are traumatized. And I tell my friends who say, well, where will money come from and how will you pay it? And I respond to them, you're gonna pay now or you'll pay later. Right? If you pay later, because if these kids get out of the system and are not educated, they get into the correction system and it costs the state $40,000 a year to incarcerate each person. You either pay now or you pay later.
Mr. Wallace, thank you. Mary, back to you.
Julian, thank you. For this next section, we will begin with a question to both candidates. Mr. Wallace, you will get the first bite of this apple this time. Baltimore is bleeding businesses. We know this. We have seen several high-profile businesses in the Inner Harbor close in recent weeks. What will you do to attract jobs back to Baltimore?
So, number one, the mayor has to take ownership of the business reality in our state, in our city. The number one reason that businesses either leave the city or don't come to the city is crime. So I get back to my crime plan to address the violence in our city because it impacts business. It impacts what businesses are trying to do. Look, I moved my business from Columbia, Maryland in 2005 to downtown Baltimore, right? My IT business, right? In the first 2 years that we were here, I had employees who were carjacked in broad daylight. Our cars were broken into every day. We have homeless issues. The tax rate is out of control. I mean, what kind of business can survive in this kind of environment? So we need to, as mayor, my plan is to change that environment, to make Baltimore what D.C. was. D.C. in the 1990s was just like Baltimore, but look at it now. The idea is to get in and change the tax structure, to change the culture of government, to make it business friendly. To Brandon Scott and people like him view businesses as a problem to be dealt with versus as a partner to be worked with.
All right, Pastor Wright, the same question to you. How will you attract jobs back into Baltimore?
So as we start to work on our education system, and companies know that they have a growing pool of potential employees here, that's one thing. Number two, we've got to make our streets safe. Not as my opponent, Mr. Scott, says, 15% safer in the first year, but actually make our streets safe. And the other thing that we have to do, and I agree, and I hate to say that, it's a little salty, but I agree with Mr. Wallace in that we need to restructure our taxes. We've got a lot of nuisance taxes and a lot of red tape that kind of make it a little bit prohibitive and cost prohibitive for businesses to come here and stay here and grow here. So we have to understand the role that businesses play and how much of our economic engine they drive. So we have to kind of bring them in and make them those partners that they are. And that's one of the things that we've got to do. Improve education so that folks know there's a growing pool of potential employees. Get rid of some of the nuisance paperwork and filings, and restructure taxes.
All right, Pastor Wright, thank you. Mr. Wallace, your Democratic opponent, Brandon Scott, 10 years on the council, did not want to be part of tonight's debate, but he has the name recognition. He, of course, won the primary. Democrats have controlled the mayor's office for more than 5 decades. How do you then set yourself apart from him and from the Democrats?
So the way that we're going to win this race is that we're building a coalition in this city that's never been built before, right? We're building a coalition of the ascendant. Who are they? They are Republicans, they're Democrats. They're independents, they're unaffiliates. They're white collar, they're blue collar. They're affluent, they're not so affluent. They're highly educated and not so highly educated. All with the same purpose and mission. They recognize that our city's going in the wrong direction. And they recognize that the leadership that we have depended upon for 40 or 50 years has just not worked. That dog don't hunt. And so now they feel a sense of urgency to make this change and make a movement. When we're walking through the neighborhoods that I'm walking with Wallace campaign, every single person is saying, we've got to change leadership. We've got to kick those bums out and get in somebody else that can do that. I'm the person for that job. I'm a business person who can talk to business leaders across the globe to bring them to Baltimore, to bring investment to our city. And we need a man or woman that can have that conversation in a very, very powerful way. And I'm that person.
Pastor Wright, African Americans have largely voted Democratic in this city for decades. You can't win without the support of the Black community. So how can you convince a larger percentage of the African American community to vote Republican?
Because I'm not asking them to vote based on policy. I'm actually asking them to vote in their own best self-interest, as the legislators that they've elected have legislated in their own self-interest and not the voters' interest. I'm asking people to vote their own common sense. I'm asking them to vote who do they think understands how, one, as a parent, you want a good education for your child and understands how to get there. You know what? I'm not even going to try to be politically correct with this. The city of Baltimore is finally waking up to the fact that the folks that they've been electing do not give a rat's behind about how they are doing. If they did, the city would not be going in the direction that it's been going in. That's number one. Number two, this city needs a fighter that will not fight against the residents of the city, but will fight for the residents of the city, that will prioritize the homeless folk on the street, that it may not be financially, the most expedient to be able to prioritize, but understanding that the least of us is some of the ones that need the most, and we have the obligation to take care of. We're going to take care of education. We're going to take care of business. We're going to make sure that the people's priorities in my administration are the city's priorities. And that people are waking up to.
All right, Mr. Wallace, you have a rebuttal to.
Yeah, somewhat. So as salty as it is for me, I have to agree with Pastor Wright a little bit on that. And that is that what I have found that makes a difference for people voting not for Republican, but for an independent, is that I talk about the dream. I talk about what we can be as a city, what we need to be as a city, and changing the mental model that people have been accustomed to using. And to Pastor Wright's point, it's all about creating the vision, and then showing them a pathway to make that dream a reality. And I think that's taking hold in Baltimore
All right,
City.
Thank you. This brings us to our closing statements. Ms. Wright, since Mr. Wallace got the first question, we are going to begin with you. Your closing statement, please.
So this time has gone really pretty fast, and I'm going to try and get to the point here. My opponent here, Bob, is not my enemy. Baltimore, he had the intestinal fortitude to show up here tonight to try and fight for your votes. Brendan Scott, who did not have the intestinal fortitude to stand up for you, is also not my enemy. His failed policies and his failed legislation and allowing our schools to fall apart and allowing our infrastructure to continue to crumble and allowing crime to continue to skyrocket, that is the enemy here. Now, the thing that you all have to do is to decide who is best equipped to handle those enemies. At this point, these aren't enemies in the closet. These are enemies we've all seen. When you try and drive from one side of the city to the other, how many folks you see that are obviously in distress, how many potholes you drive through, how many piles of trash that haven't been picked up. So you got to decide who is really ready to get their hands dirty, understands what it means to make it do what it do, and is willing to actually do that. Now, using the wisdom of a king, one of the kings in the Bible, ideally, if you want to see Baltimore go in a new direction, and you want to see a mayor in my administration that will put you first by starting off day one, by firing everyone we're not contractually obligated to keep and asking them to reapply and tell us why they deserve to keep spending your hard-earned tax dollars. That's one of the things that I'm willing to do because I am that fighter for this city. The second thing that we are willing to do because we are that fighters for this city is I'll be doggone, but we're going to bring free Wi-Fi to this city for our residents, for our students, and for our businesses that need to survive COVID and make that transition from brick and mortar. And lastly, a vote for Wright for mayor turns the city in the right direction.
Ms.
Thank
Wright,
you.
Thank you. Mr. Wallace, your closing statement.
Yes, ma'am. In August 1963, the March on Washington, everyone knows Dr. King gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. But I want to draw your attention to the speech that was given before Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech. It was given by a rabbi. His name was Rabbi Joachim Prince. He was a rabbi in Nazi Germany in Berlin at the rise of Nazism at that time. He saw the persecution of the Jewish people. And he said something that stuck with me. He said that what was not so much appalling was the hatred and discrimination and the violence and the terrorism. That was appalling, but the most appalling part was the silence. It was the silence of the German people who knew what was happening with Nazism and did nothing about it. Beloved, as you look at the city of Baltimore and you look at the direction that we're going in, that we're getting smaller, we're less safe, we're less rich, we have fewer jobs, businesses are leaving, we can't control picking up trash and recycling. I ask you, is that the city that you believe in and that you want to be the reality for us? It is not. But it is a sin. It is appalling. As Rabbi Joachim Prince said, it is appalling for those of us who can make a difference to stand on the side, watch this train wreck occur, and do nothing about it. I need your help to get us back on track as a city. I need your help to tell this old leadership model that dog don't hunt and they no longer have a place in this city. I need your help to give this city back to the people of Baltimore City, to put people over profits, to put people over party and certainly to put people over politics. That's the Baltimore we deserve, and that's the Baltimore I will give you as mayor.
All right.
God bless you.
Mr. Wallace and Pastor Wright, thank you. I want to thank both candidates for appearing tonight. I want to thank our researcher, Julian Barron, for his work tonight as well. Thanks, Julian. A reminder that the deadline to request a mail-in ballot in Maryland is October 20th. Early voting begins on October 26th. It runs through November 2nd. Of course, Election Day is November 3rd.